Well, Happy New Year, everybody. Yeah, welcome to 2023 here at Northway, here in Wexford, and of course across all of the Pittsburgh region at all of our locations, and certainly also online. I am pumped to start this new year together with you. You know, last week we had our services online and we launched an initiative to unite together in prayer for 14 days. We are on day 8 technically. It started last Sunday and we are focusing on being together in praying for singleness and for married folks and for folks who are in a legacy stage of their life. And I love how this initiative has impacted me personally. You know what prayer does for me? It does a lot of things. It's amazing. It's fantastic. But prayer often takes those things I'm focused on, like when I walk into a room, the things I'm worried about or anxious about or consumed with. It takes all those little things and it reminds me about who's walking into that room with me. And the more we unite together in prayer around our singleness and our married state and around our idea of leaving a legacy, something for the next generation, the more together we will remember that the one who's with us is greater than the one that's in the world. So if you have not yet jumped into the app and joined in on prayer, it's not too late. Unity is so important in God's kingdom work. So join in this prayer initiative for the next 7 days. And on the topic of relationships, I'm excited today to be able to talk about one thing that I know, I'm deeply convinced, will transform all of our relationships, no matter if you're in a single state or a married state, or if you're thinking about passing something on to the next generation in terms of legacy. I'm excited for this week and the next 2 weeks to do what we call Circle Up around some ideas that are important for our church to hear together. And today, we're talking about relationships. So over the Christmas break, I had something incredible in terms of an opportunity on my calendar with me and my sons. If you know, you probably heard me say I am a giant University of North Carolina Tar Heel fan. They're the greatest sports team ever to me. I love them. They're my favorite basketball team, and I just go crazy for them. And if you would know, they were in town on the 30th. They played Pitt. They had a game at the Peterson Event Center. And so I jumped online Christmas week, and I was able to find some tickets. I found a great deal, 3 tickets for me and my sons. And so we geared up. We put on our baby blue. We put on the NC logo and our Nike swoosh signs, all that kind of stuff. And we grabbed a photo at the Peterson Event Center, and we were there for Pitt to play the Tar Heels, and honestly, the day and the days leading up to that day, I was filled with amazing anticipation. I was so excited about this because we geek out about the Tar Heels. We do. We just love them, and they are what we love to focus our time and our energy on in a lot of ways in terms of like entertainment. And so we're there, and we're hopeful, and we're so excited. And I left that morning telling my wife, this is going to be the greatest day ever. Then at the end of that day, about 12, 13 hours later, as I was sitting on the couch and I was thinking about that day and everything that had transpired, there was one word that would describe what I experienced that day. Frustration. Maybe even annoyance. Yes, the Tar Heels lost to Pitt, okay? And that wasn't why, because the Pitt coaches, don't be clapping for that. No, not on my watch, no. No, I don't care if you went to Pitt, no, right? The Pitt coaches did a phenomenal job. I mean, hats off to them. They game planned so well. And like the Tar Heels, listen, I'm 44. I'm mature enough not to get all bent out of shape when my team loses, right? But the reason I was frustrated and annoyed was because of all the people that day. Come on, aren't people annoying sometimes? You're like, can I laugh at that? Yes, you can. People can be incredibly frustrating. We're watching the game, right? First half, and then right behind us, as the momentum started to swing in Pitt's favor, there were these 4 boys right behind me, 10, maybe 11 years old. And every time UNC would have the ball or mess up, they would yell mean things at my team. And that frustrated me because that's my team. And you don't talk like that about my team. And I looked over at my son, Gino, who's sitting next to me, and I looked at him and I said, I want to hurt those kids right now. That's what happens when we get frustrated, right? We want to harm people. At halftime of the game, the guy who was sitting behind me came back. And you chit-chat with people that are sitting around you. And he said, you're not going to believe this. There was a fight at the concession stand over a pretzel. Like grown men fist fighting over an they're good, but they're not that good, right? Right? They're fist fighting, and in my heart and in my mind, I'm like, this is where the world is right now. We're fighting over food, and I'm judging them. I wanted to harm the kids behind me. I'm judging those men who are out in the concession area fighting. And then after the game, after we lost, we walked to our car and we drove down to the strip district because we were hungry. And we have a favorite place that we love to go get a sandwich. And so we walked there and we got in line. There was about 6 people in front of us, and we waited our turn in line. And we got to the end and we said, hey, we want some sandwiches. And she goes, he's not here. I'm like, he's not here? We want a sandwich. She goes, the guy that makes them left. I'm like, okay, so why don't you make us a sandwich? Like, it's not that hard, right? I can get back there. I'll put a hat on. I don't need a hairnet. I'm good, right? Let me just fire up that grill and we'll get going on the sandwich construction. She goes, he's not here. There's no sandwiches today. And I'm like, there's no sign? I waited in this line, and this is my favorite place. And so I was like, okay, we're not going to buy anything. And we walk out of the restaurant, and guess what was going on in my mind? They're going to pay for that one. I'm never coming back here again. Because I have a right to have my sandwich when I want it. And sandwich man, I don't care if you wanted a day off, you should have been here. Right? And so I want to punish those people there. And I'm frustrated and I'm angry. And then wouldn't you know that I look up as we're walking and I see someone that I haven't talked to for about 2 years. And you know that moment when you don't want them to see you, and so you're looking but not looking, and you're looking to the left, and we hit an intersection where there was a light, and so everyone's sort of backed up, and I'm looking, and I'm near them, and I'm slowly backing up, and my boys don't know anything is going on, and I'm hoping, please turn right because we have to walk straight. Right? There's people sometimes that are bringing about frustration and annoyance, and all you want to do in life is avoid them. You don't want to interact with them. And later on that day, when we finally finished up in the strip district and the annoyance was brewing and building, that evening, before I summarized my day by saying, I am just annoyed and frustrated today, I received a text, and the text had 3 little characters in the text, and it was sent directly to me. It said, H2P. If you didn't go to Pitt or you don't follow Pitt, that means hail to Pitt. It's like rubbing salt in my wound. And I just honestly, in that moment, I boiled over. I got so frustrated and so angry over these 3 little characters. And wouldn't you know, the person that sent me that text works at Northway too. You're like guessing, like, who was it? I think I know who it was. You don't have any clue who this person was. And honestly, I replied and I said, I am not talking to you for 24 hours. And I shunned them. I silenced them. See, here's my summary. As I said, my day was annoying and my day was frustrating. I looked back and I said, like, regardless of the win or loss, today would have been so much better if it weren't for all those people. Do you ever think that? You got all these relationships. Maybe you live with a bunch of people, maybe friends or their family, or maybe over Christmas you got together with a bunch of people, and the summary thought at the end of that time was, today would have been so much better if it weren't for all those people. See, I think we go through life and we have our relationships, we have our marriages, we have our parenting relationships, we have our father, son, daughter, mother, all those kind of different relationships in our life. And we have this prevailing thought that's driving and nagging at us all the time. It's this idea that my personal life would be better if so-and-so, insert their name, would just insert your solution. If my mom or my dad or my wife or my husband or my oldest boy or my youngest daughter, if they would just grow up. Stop being so needy. Stop talking. Stop being lazy. Stick to their word. Be honest once in a while. See, isn't that true? We all navigate life and we bump into the frustration and the annoyance of relationships, and deep down inside, we know what would fix things. We have the answers about how to solve that so our life and consequently our relationships would be better and more fulfilling and less frustrating and less annoying. But let me just ask you a question right now. Out of all the solutions you know for your wife or your husband or your kids or your mom or your brother or you know for me, out of all those fixes and those solutions, have you ever actually fixed someone? Have you fixed your son yet? Have you fixed your husband? Have you fixed your boss? Have you fixed your mom or your dad? Have you fixed your wife? See, here's the deepest truth when it comes to relationships and this idea of frustration and the fixes and solutions that we have deep in our hearts and in our souls. Yes, we know what will fix people, but truth be told, we are actually unable to change people. I can never change you, and you can never change me. And that's what's maddening about relationships. As much as I wanted those kids to stop and change and grow up, as much as I wanted that relationship with that person to be different and for them to act different, as much as I wanted Sandwich Guy not to leave work early, as much as I wanted that person not to send me that text, I can't change any of those things. And as I thought about all 5 of those situations and my holidays and my interactions with my family and every bit of frustration that I've experienced in my relationships, you know what sobering thought came to my mind? In any one of those scenarios, there's one consistent thread. Me. In all of your life, in all of your relationship scenarios at work and in your community and with your kids' teachers and with your kids' coaches and with your boss and with your spouse and with your family, the one thing that's constant and present in all those moments, it's you. And yet we consume our lives with how to fix other people, don't we? You know, Jesus talks about this very thing. He talks about the idea that we're all wrestling through in the Sermon on the Mount. It's the longest section of Jesus' actual recorded words, a moment where he was teaching at a very lengthy moment, and he's talking to people so they'll understand who God is and what it looks like to experience real freedom and real lasting peace. Jesus is trying to give us the words of life, and he speaks about relationships right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 6 and 7, Jesus says this, "Therefore, don't be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Judge not, that you would not be judged." We've heard that phrase before. We've probably used that phrase before whenever we're painted in a corner. "For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye? Why do you see the speck that's in your spouse's eye? Why do you see the speck that's in your kid's teacher's eye? Why do you see the speck that's in your parent's eye or your brother or sister's eye? Why do you focus so much on that little itty bitty speck, but you don't notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." This is Jesus talking. And the question we face today, if we want to navigate relationships well, if we want to experience peace and life and joy and fulfillment in our relationships, the question at the bottom of the root of our soul is, do we really believe Jesus' words bring life? You know, when we look at this text, there's some things that certainly jump out to me. You know, Jesus is talking about anxiety, and that's in chapter 6, and he talks a little bit about why we shouldn't be so anxious in this world. And then I find it amazing that right after, you know, Jesus didn't talk and say, okay, this is end of chapter 6 for the note taker, let's go to chapter 7. No, Jesus was just talking, and it's recorded, and right after speaking about anxiety, he jumps in and starts talking about our interactions with each other and our relationships with each other. You see, I surmise that anxiety often stems from our relationships. Like community and friendships and intimacy, marriage, singleness, all those things carry most of the concerns and worries of our day. And here is Jesus immediately following up this phrase of don't be anxious for anything by focusing on relationships. You know that word judge there, it means to actually bring about a final statement, like to officially declare something about someone or someone else. You know all those solutions we have for each other, all those fixes we have in mind about how to make you better so that our relationship will change? Those fixes are judgments. They're things we want to pronounce about you, that we are certain about. And then Jesus goes on and says, don't worry about the speck, this itty bitty thing in someone else's eye. He said, instead, take the log out of your own eye. Now, here's where it gets really, really interesting. And you're wondering, like, what's going on here? I took karate lessons over the break, and I'm going to be breaking this in just a quick second. I'm going to breathe in, I'm going to breathe out, right? See, most times when we read this passage of Scripture, we think of something like this, maybe a little piece of firewood. This is actually a birch decoration from our house. I got permission from my wife to use it. She said, just bring it back, please, right? We think that what Jesus is saying is this. You got a little log in your eye. You got something there that it's there, but I can still see around it. And if I have to and I'm good enough, I can kind of hide it and make you not see it. But the reality is, in the Greek, what Jesus was actually talking about was this bad boy here. He's talking about a beam. Like, this thing is so heavy and so massive, we had to get orange construction horses to hold it up. It took 4 people to put this thing in place. And this is the picture Jesus wants us to see when it comes to our frustration and annoyances in our relationships, not this thing right here. See, sometimes we conveniently alter things for our comfort, and we miss out on what Jesus is trying to stretch us and grow us in, and ultimately lead us to peace and life. Jesus is saying, this is what's in your eye. Why are you so focused on a speck in someone else's eye? You know, when we think about a log, when we think about and classify it this way, this is annoying. If I had to carry this every day, I would get annoyed. I would get like a little bit of a shoulder workout, and then I would maybe try and switch it over. And I'd find a way to deal with my day carrying this. But if I had to carry this thing every single day, that's impossible, isn't it? I don't even know if I could lift this up and hold it for 60 seconds, right? This is annoying. That is impossible. When you think about the difference between a log and a beam, a log will hinder or alter maybe the way I see you, but if I work and strain hard enough, there might be 3 of you I'm looking at, but I can still sort of see you. But if this is really in my eye, I'm blind. All those fixes I have for you, I'm seeing them through this. Which means my fixes may not be as accurate as I think. Because chances are I'm probably just guessing a little bit. When we think about a log in our eye, and we think about this little picture, if someone tries to get close with me, if you want to be in small group with me or be my friend, my wife, if I think about a log this way, I'm going to scratch her or bump into her with this, maybe cause a bruise or a mark. But when I realize that I've got a beam in my eye and it's this massive and it's this heavy, that thing destroys people. See, we've got to see what Jesus is saying. Especially if we want to navigate relationships that are fulfilling and healthy, if we don't want to be so frustrated and annoyed, if we want to truly not be anxious, we've got to learn that Jesus is talking about this, not this. And all we do is hurt ourselves if we change the definition. A beam is what holds up the roof of a house. A beam is what, if you go down into your basement, it's what holds up the whole first floor and the major weight in the center of your home. Jesus is saying there is something massive and heavy. It blinds us. It's impossible to carry around, and ultimately it destroys people the longer it stays in our eye. That's what's in your eye. Why are you focused on someone else's speck? But I come back to what I said. Do you believe Jesus' words are the words of life? See, what I think I hear our Savior saying is that if we want real peace, if we want less anxiety in our relationship, then the focus of our time and our mental energy and our cognitive ability needs to be more tended and directed towards beam removal than speck fixing. That's what Jesus is saying. But I can't choose that for you. Only you can choose that for you. Brooke can't choose, my wife, she can't choose whether I'm going to focus on specks or beams. That's a choice you and I must make. I don't know if you were struck like me whenever I was watching church last Sunday and I was experiencing the online thing. There was a song where Seti Conway was like sharing it and singing it, and he uttered this lyric and this line, and when he did it, it was like an arrow that stuck in the target of my heart, and I couldn't get around it, and I felt like it's all that I could hear. He said this: "There are depths of love I cannot know until I walk your narrow road." See, here's the idea. Beam removal is a narrow road. It's a path very few people want to follow. You know what the wide road is? Blame, accusation, react, cope, adjust. Make sure you always deflect and don't let anything ever stick to you. Personal responsibility and the idea of self-identification of issues we need to work on, that's become a lost art in our world. And the way of the world, the wide path, is always focused on specks and everyone else. But Jesus is saying, my road is narrow. There's an author named Rob Reimer. He wrote a book called Soul Care. Listen to the words he says when it comes to this idea that Jesus is talking about. He says, maturity is a choice that we have to make. And maturity, spiritual maturity in our relationships, it's a price we have to pay. You'll never rise above your level of self-awareness. That's the lid. That's the inhibitor in our relationships. That's the frustration. It's not everybody else. The things we deny about ourselves, the beams we ignore or avoid or try not to see, those are the very things that deny us from the fullness or the peace or the frustration-free life that God is offering. So I ask you again, in 2023, as you think about your relationships, are you willing to walk the narrow road? Are you willing to believe that Jesus' words are the words of life? You see, here's what I believe he's saying. What needs to change in your marriages and in your singleness and in your parenting and in your friendships and in your interactions in the community, what needs to change is how we see people. Because when we remove beams, our eyes get redeemed. See, that's why Jesus earlier in Matthew chapter 6 said, "You're in my eye, they're the lamp of the body." And if your eye is healthy, your whole body is healthy. When you remove beams, when you forget about the speck in everyone else's eye, and you don't consume yourself with those fixes, but you really hunker down and you walk a narrow road and you ask God, show me these beams because I want rid of them. You fix your eye and your whole body gets full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. What would this year look like if you made it your job and your focus to identify and remove the beams in your eye? Period. One thing can dramatically change all of our relationships. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, so what's a beam, right? I wonder, do I really have a giant railroad tie sticking out of my eye? Why hasn't anyone told me this in my life? Here's the idea. Beams are the subtle things that we actually get used to. Beams are the things that we actually sort of like in our life. Beams are the things that we actually sort of deserve, and sometimes we need help understanding if I'm going to pray, if I'm going to walk that narrow road, if I'm going to really do this hard thing of pursuing self-awareness and spiritual maturity, and I'm going to let God speak into me as I do that, I want to give us a bit of a jump start to know what God is likely going to point out in our life. Here's the first thing. This is something that I would say it's a beam in terms of our relationships. It's desires that have cemented into expectations. It's all the things that we used to sort of desire and like to be surprised by in our marriage and in our friendships and as consumers, but now I demand them. I expect them. You want to know why I was so frustrated with Sandwich Guy at my favorite restaurant? You want to know why I felt like I have the right to walk out and never walk back in there again? Because I expect to be served when I am willing to pay. You ever look at how we behave as consumers anymore? It's not very pretty, is it? Our expectations are out of control. The idea that the customer is always right, the idea that it's my right and I deserve, it has invaded and infiltrated our lives, and consequently, it's wrecking our relationships. Think about how we act in restaurants. Think about how we respond about airlines. Think about how we respond when Amazon Prime took 3 days and not 2. We demand to have it our way right away. We've got to forget Burger King. We've got to get back to a healthier spot where we have desires of things we want out of our relationships, but not grow them and cement them into expectations. This is what Paul is talking about in Romans 12 when he says to everyone not to think so highly of yourself, but to look back at yourself with sober judgment, meaning soberly look for a beam of a desire that's grown into an expectation. You know why expectations ruin and mar and destroy relationships? You know why expectations make you impossible? Is because when someone misses out on your expectation, you get this is like the ugliest word, and I would ever hate when someone said this to me. This was the word that if I heard my parents say this, it wrecked me. I'm so disappointed in you. Ugh. I melt like wax when someone says that to me. And when someone misses your expectations, they become a disappointment to you. And the longer someone remains in your eyes a disappointment, you just want to dismiss them then and move on. Some of us, we have just expectations that are way out of control, and they're wrecking our marriage. They're wrecking our families. We're hurting our kids because they feel like they're not enough. And truth be told, it's not their speck, it's our beam. Jesus offers the way of life. It's a narrow road. Are you willing this year to forget about the specks and look for your beams that are making you impossible, that are making you blind to the world, that are destroying the people you profess to love? Here's the second thing. This is another beam that if we are serious and we ask God, will you show me these things? This is something I know he has shown in my life. It's sin that I have grown comfortable with. Sin ruins intimacy. Look at Genesis chapter 3. Look at what happened when Adam and Eve disobeyed and they ate the fruit. They were separated from God. Sin always brings about separation. You want to know why I didn't want to see and talk to that person that I saw in the strip district? It has been 2 years and there has not been reconciliation. And delayed obedience is disobedience. And disobedience from God is sin. And I have not done everything I can, as far as it depends on me, to live at peace with that person. And that's why I want to avoid them and not see them and not have to bump into them. That's why for the next hour I was ruined, looking over my shoulder, wondering, am I going to see them? Is this going to be awkward? That's why I got quiet and my boys were looking to have fun and enjoy the time together. Sin separates so many things that we desire in this world. And sometimes we've grown comfortable with our sin and we don't realize it's a giant beam in our life. Do you ever notice somebody that has bad breath? They don't know it, but you do. And you don't want to be around them. That's what sin's like. We get used to it and comfortable with it. You know what greed does in our life? Greed creates competition everywhere we go. Everyone is our competitor. And you know what we want to do in competition with our enemies? We want to defeat them and destroy them, and we will do whatever it takes to win. You know what jealousy does? It creates an envy in our heart, and it creates a comparison kind of attitude, and it separates people from our life, and we start to literally hate people, and we don't even know them, and it's our greed. It's not their success in life that's marring and destroying the relationship. You know what pornography does? It crushes intimacy. Any form of sexual immorality and perversion and lust makes people in our lives an object that we believe, and this is a lie, that we believe should just be there to fulfill us and be at our beck and call. Sin crushes intimacy and community. It's a giant beam in our life, and we are focused on everyone else's speck. Here's the third thing that I believe if we're willing to walk a narrow road and get with God and ask him to show us what are the beams in our life, unhealed wounds from our past. A wise friend once told me that if we don't heal from the wounds in our past, we'll end up bleeding out on everyone else who didn't cut us. You know why those three little characters bugged me so much that I wanted to shun my close friend, H2P? It's because in my past, people have used sarcasm and jokes at my expense. And they've used these things and they've disguised them as humor, but they were really just trying to put me down. And oftentimes I wonder, did you really mean that or is it a joke? Are you trying to say something about me? And so I live on edge, and I'd rather not people make jokes at my expense. We have wounds in our past, and the way we cope with them is anger and distance and separation. Did y'all see what happened earlier this week, Monday Night Football, the man Damar Hamlin from Pittsburgh? I mean, thank God he is healing and he's talking now, but for the first 2 days after this horrific cardiac moment on the field, I don't know if you noticed what was happening. My son Gino came in and said, "Dad, something happened. We've got to check this out." He's from Pittsburgh. He went to Pitt and he plays for the Buffalo Bills. And in the moment on the field, everyone was saying, "We need to pray for Damar. We need to give our thoughts and our prayers." And everyone was calling for prayer. But then about an hour later, did you notice how quickly the narrative changed? How could they have gone out there and warmed up again? Why aren't they calling the game? What took the NFL so long? Did you hear what so-and-so on SportsCenter said about that moment? We have wounds in our past and we don't know how to grieve. We don't know how to sit in loss. We don't know how to feel pain. And so what do? We have learned to cope with anger and blame and pointing fingers. And the narrative shifts and the wound persists. See, some of us, we're bleeding out over people that we love and people that love us because we have coped rather than allowed God to heal us from our wounds. That's a giant beam that's destroying our relationships. Here's the fourth beam that I know that we need to remove in our lives. It's called unhealthy personal goals. Want to know why those kids bothered me so much? The 4 kids back here, I can still picture all 4 of them. Because I love the Tar Heels. And I have this goal that they will, it's like what I deeply believe. You think, are you serious? Yes, I actually am. They will never lose a game in my lifetime again. And when something starts to block that goal or hinder or mock that goal, I get angry inside. And that's why I wanted to harm those kids, right? Now that's a really silly example, right? But let me be real and honest with you. You know why feedback and disagreement with my preaching stings so much? Because I have an unhealthy goal that I can be perfect. That I can give the greatest sermon that everyone will just agree and be changed by. That I can be a perfect pastor, that I can be the exception, that disagreement and conflict and frustration and negative feedback, that's for everyone else. That's not for me. That's called an unhealthy goal. Some of us believe deep down that we can be a perfect parent, that we can be a perfect spouse, that we can be the greatest salesperson, that we can be the greatest or the exception or the perfect fill in the blank, but truth be told, we can't. And that is an unhealthy goal that is causing us to harm people in our lives or, get this, harm ourselves. Some of us can't live with ourselves because we are not perfect. Jesus doesn't call us to be perfect. See, the only goal that's healthy as we walk and we know and we experience and follow Jesus, it's simply to make the aim of our life not to be the greatest or the perfect or the exception. It's to simply walk humbly with our God. And when our goal in life is unhealthy, people become pawns or obstacles. And we use them or we remove them. See, some of us, we have an unhealthy goal, a giant beam in our life, and it's crushing the people we love. And we wonder, why are we so frustrated? Why are we so annoyed? Why can't we really have peace? Beam removal. It's what Jesus says is the way to do our relationships. About 120 years ago, early 1900s, there was an issue going on in the world. There was chaos there. You know, this is right before World War I. And in London, a newspaper, The Times, they wanted to figure out what's going on. So just side note, there's always something wrong in our world. If we ever think that today is the exception, don't believe that lie. Our world is cursed. Until Jesus comes back again, we don't experience the fullness of hope and healing. Back in the 1900s, they wanted to get together and get perspective on this. And so they wrote to leading philosophers and leading authors and leading thought people. And they asked this question and they wanted a response. They said, what's wrong with the world? And there's a man, he was a Catholic person who was a thought leader and a philosopher. He wrote back very quickly to the Times and he said, "Dear sirs, you want to know what's wrong with the world? I am." He said, "I'm wrong with the world. I am the problem. I've got beams in my eye." See, today, the response in the culture says, you know what's wrong with the world? You are. And what Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount and what G.K. Chesterton fully understood, he understood that walking humbly with the Lord means that we go about our relationships not with the you are attitude, but with first an I am attitude. With a humble desire to remove beams so that then, in turn, our eyes can be redeemed and we can see people as they truly are. We can start to see people as God sees people. When we see others as God sees them, that is the recipe for amazing relationships. But it's a narrow road. See, I said at the beginning of this sermon that there's one key that I believe is important for us in 2023 when it comes to relationships, and here it is. It's way more of an I am attitude than a you are attitude. It's really looking at ourselves and our eyes in terms of a beam's worth of self-awareness versus a speck's worth of personal self-awareness. Are you willing to walk that road? Because Jesus' words are the words of life. Psalm 139 says this, and this is the prayer I would ask you to make every single day if you're willing to walk this road. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me. Notice how much it's focused on our lives and our relationship with God. Try me and know my thoughts and see if there be any wicked way in me. Notice there's no word you. It's all me. Would you bow your heads with me today? Heavenly Father, narrow roads are about the last thing that we want to walk. Let's just be honest. And yet, God, I hear your call and I trust your heart and I ask you, God, as we all have so many different relational scenarios, Lord, would you give us courage to take steps down this path? God, would you show us the beams that we've been carrying around that have been destroying our relationships, that have made us impossible, that have blinded us to the beauty you've surrounded us with in terms of people. God, we want to be free and we want to know peace, so we trust you in your words. God, would you help us on this journey because we sure need it. God, help us be more I am people rather than you are people. We trust your words and we ask for your help. It's in Jesus' name I pray. And everyone said, amen.